Hey, it's Medium Jenny Lee. I'm here with the next Raw discussion video. We're on session 35. There's so many. So this is video number 36. Okay, here we go. Questioner. Don says, I would like to say that we consider this a great privilege to do this work, and we hope that we are going to question in a direction that will be of value to the readers of this material. Smiley face. In this session, I thought that possibly inspecting the effect of the rays of different well-known figures in our history might be of help in understanding how the catalyst of the illusion creates spiritual growth. I was making a list. Hit on the high points as the effect of the catalyst of the individual's working life of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is a fun session, going over some historical figures. So FDR, here we go. It is to be noted that in discussing those who are well known among your people, there is a possibility that information may be seen to be specific to one entity, whereas in actuality, the great design of experience is much the same for each entity. It is with this in mind that we would discuss the experiential forces which offered catalyst to an individual. So just because somebody's famous, president or otherwise, doesn't mean that they didn't have a life that was very similar to everybody else's life. Remember that. It is further to be noted that in the case of those entities lately incarnate upon your planet, much distortion may be taken place in regard to the misinformation or misinterpretation of an entity's thoughts or behaviors. So we might not understand exactly. Misinformation, misinterpretation. We shall now proceed to speak of the basic parameters of the one known as Franklin. When an entity comes into third density incarnation, each of its energy centers is potentiated but must be activated by the self using experience. So everything's ready to go, but you have to activate it. The one known as Franklin developed very quickly up through red, orange, yellow, and green. So root, sacral, solar plexus, heart, and began to work in the blue ray energy center at a tender age. The rapid growth was due firstly to the previous achievements in the activation of these rays. So in previous lives, he had activated and had achieved things with all those rays before. Secondly, to the relative comfort and leisure of its early existence. So, he was born into a pretty good family, so he had plenty of leisure time to do stuff and relative comfort. Thirdly, due to the strong desire upon the part of the entity to progress. This entity mated with an entity whose blue ray vibrations were of a strength more equal to its own, thus acquiring catalyst for further growth in that area that is to persist throughout the incarnation. Woohoo, Eleanor Roosevelt. She had some good blue ray energy going. This entity had some difficulty with continued green ray activation due to the excessive energy which it put into the activities regarding other selves and the distortion toward acquiring power. This was to have its toll upon the physical vehicle. So, there you go. He started going after power, and it caused some distortions with the green ray, and that is partly why he ended up having physical ailments. The limitation of the non-movement of the portion of the physical vehicle opened once again for this entity the opportunity for concentration upon the more universal or idealistic aspects of power, that is, the non-abusive use of power. Thus, at the outset of a bellicose action, this entity had lost some positive polarity due to the excessive use of the orange and yellow ray energies at the expense of green and blue ray energies. Then he had regained the polarity due to the catalytic effects of a painful limitation upon the physical complex. So Roosevelt's trying to go after power, Clearly he succeeds because he becomes the president of the United States. But the physical ailments that he suffered which, I believe were from having polio as a child, caused him to be somewhat paralyzed, and he had to be in a wheelchair, and it sounds like it was pretty painful, started turning him back towards green and blue when the war started. World War II. Okay, let's continue. The entity was not of a bellicose nature, but rather during the conflict continued to vibrate in the green ray, working with the blue ray energies. Good job, FDR. So he didn't want to be going to war, and he was sending out green ray energy from the heart, working with the blue ray energies. Now here's a part that I very much appreciated. The entity, who was the one known as Franklin's teacher, also functioned greatly during this period as the blue ray activator, not only for its mate, but also in a more universal expression. So Eleanor Roosevelt was considered to be one of his teachers. She was helping him with his blue ray activation, which is your throat chakra, with communication. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with history, FDR had the fireside chats where he would come on television or the radio. I don't think television was a thing yet, but he would come on the radio and do these fireside chats for the nation during the wartime. Maybe even before the wartime, I'm not sure. So he's continuously communicating with the country with love, like sincerely. And one of the reasons why he's doing this is because of Eleanor Roosevelt. She's helping him because she was a little bit stronger in her blue ray communication to make sure he was communicating with everybody. I really like it. I love it. And Eleanor was into woo-woo stuff. Who would have thought? All right, but then it gets a little sad. This entity polarized continuously in a positive fashion in the universal sense, while in a less universal sense developed a pattern of what you would call karma. This karma having to do with an inharmonious relationship distortion with the mate teacher. Boo. So even though they're together and they're helping each other through this really difficult time, they weren't very harmonious, Franklin and Eleanor. How sad. Then Franklin's teacher was his wife. Correct. Yay. Did Franklin place the limitation of his physical body himself? Partly correct. Basic guidelines for the lessons and purposes of the incarnation have been carefully set forth by incarnation of the mind-body-spirit complex totality. So in a later session, the totality stuff comes up, and it gets really, really weird, complicated, convoluted, and strange. But let's not talk about that right now. Right now we're talking about historical figures. If the one known as Franklin has avoided the excessive enjoyment of or attachment to the competitiveness which may be seen to be inherent in the process of its occupation, this entity would not have had the limitation. So he sort of chose it for himself, but it sounds like his path could have gone any which way. If he wouldn't have gone to a path of being competitive and getting power, then he wouldn't have got the limitation, the physical limitation. However, the desire to serve and to grow was strong in this programming, and when the opportunities began to cease during these distortions toward love of power, the entity's limiting factor was activated. So there you go. Now we're going to talk about Hitler. Put your seatbelt on, people. Whenever Hitler comes up, it's always a hot mess. And there might be some things that come up. Here we go. Okay. And speaking of the one you call, oh no, wait a minute, we missed the question. I would now like to ask for the same type of information of Adolf Hitler. And speaking of the one you call Adolf, we have some difficulty due to the intense amount of confusion present in the entity's life patterns, as well as the great confusion which greets any discussion of this entity. For sure. So what Ra is saying here is there's a lot of confusion for the entity itself, and then there's a great confusion when anybody tries to talk about him. Yes, absolutely. Because we automatically have to. It's like you can't even. You have to think of Adolf Hitler as the most evil person ever in the existence of people because of all the awful, awful things that he has done. You know, you just have to. But let's continue here. Okay. In attempting activation of the highest rays of energy while lacking the green ray key, it canceled itself out as far as polarization toward either positive or negative. So he's basically trying to skip over activating different energy centers and going straight for the top. He's trying to reach God quickly, trying to reach the spiritual quickly. But he had no green ray activation. So because of this, there is no polarization toward positive or negative. This entity was basically negative, but he didn't level up in either direction. However, its confusion was such that the personality disintegrated, thus leaving the mind-body-spirit complex unharvestable and in much need of healing. His personality disintegrated because there was so much confusion because he didn't go through the right channels of activating his stuff. It just becomes a mess, which clearly we saw because of all of the terrible things he decided to do. He was unharvestable and in much need of healing. So just imagine for 1 second being Hitler and you get to the other side and you have to realize what you did. Because in the next paragraph, next couple of paragraphs, you'll see. But just keep that in mind for a second. This entity followed the pattern of negative polarization, which suggests the elite and the enslaved. This is being seen by the entity to be of a helpful nature of the societal structure. Good God Almighty. But, you know, it happens over and over and over again in history that for some awful reason, the service to self people think that enslaving and having an elite group is something that's helpful for society. I mean, we just see it over and over again throughout history. So that's what he was thinking. However, in drifting from the conscious polarization into what you might call a twilight world, where dream took the place of events in your time-space continuum, this entity failed in its attempt to serve the Creator in a harvestable degree along the path of service to self. Thus we see the so-called insanity, which may often arise when an entity attempts to polarize more quickly than experience may be integrated. So he's trying to polarize so quickly without any experience, which is pretty much what happens to him. He goes from being like a nobody, like a loser. He ends up like if you didn't know this about Hitler, he wanted to be an artist. And he applied to be in an art school and he got rejected. So then he gets caught up in the politics of his country, which after World War I is like completely crumbled. And he tries to come up with a way to make his country a better place. That's what he's trying to do in all the wrong ways. And somewhere in there, because he's trying to move up so quickly, and actually he does move up so quickly in the political ranks. He goes from being a nobody to all of a sudden the ruler of this place and all these people. That because he didn't have the experience, all of a sudden now he literally loses his mind. It refers to him being in a twilight world where dreams seem like reality. So to me, it seems like, I mean, we can probably all assume that he was delusional, but that he didn't know what was real anymore. He didn't even know what was real anymore, which does not in any way, shape, or form condone anything that he does, because we still have to take responsibility for our actions. But it makes complete sense. The man literally was crazy. He was literally insane. He literally had lost his mind. And then he ends up being the leader of the little country and starting this war and doing like the most heinous stuff you can possibly imagine. But then let's go back a second to what happens to him when he crosses over to the other side. And the veil of the insanity is released because he doesn't have his mind, his messed up mind anymore. Can you imagine having to understand what in the hell you did? Unbelievable. It would be unbelievable. When his mind was finally clear because he didn't have the distortions of the physical reality anymore, having to see the horrible atrocities that you've done. And that's why that's what Ra says. He was in much need of healing. And I believe that had come up in a previous session too. Yeah, no shit. Yeah. And, I think 99.9% of people would like to imagine Hitler roasting in a spit over the lake of flames in hell with, demons poking stuff at him. But that's not really the way things work. And we have to heal. We have to understand, accept, and forgive all the things that have been done to us and that we have done to others, so that we can move up. Even Hitler has to do this. So, let's move along. We have advised and suggested caution and patience in previous communications, and do so again using this entity as an example of the over-hasty opening of the polarization without due attention to the synthesized and integrated mind-body-spirit complex. To know yourself is to have the foundation upon firm ground. So Ra's like, be careful talking about him, because there's so much confusion, distortions, and then the things that he did just in a spiritual sense. Over hasty opening of polarization without due attention to synthesize and integrated mind-body-spirit complex. He didn't know himself. He hadn't had the right experiences, the right catalyst to activate all his energy centers, and instead he just tries to shoot up, straight out, up and out. And look what happens to him. So keep that in mind as you're going through your own spiritual journey, that it takes time, and you have to do certain things and the right steps for yourself. And you don't even know what those steps are unless you know yourself. You have to know yourself. All right, let's move on. I was wondering if any of those who were subordinate to Adolf at the time were able to polarize in a harvestable nature on the negative path. Two entities may be harvestable in a negative sense. still being in the physical incarnation. Others still being in the physical incarnation. So remember, this is 1981. World War II takes place in the 40s. So some of these people are still alive. But the two of the people that had passed that were able to move up were Hermann and Himmler. So let's look them up real quick. Because I had a discussion with Frostine about this, because he's a history person. He's a history teacher. He has a master's degree in history. But we ended up talking about it, and I didn't write any of it down. So it would be helpful if I typed the right letters. Okay. Hermann Göring. A German politician, military leader, convicted as a war criminal. It's one of the most powerful figures of the Nazi Party from 1933 to 1945. So that's, that's one of them. Hermann Göring. And then Heinrich Himmler is the other one. I know that one. Heinrich Himmler. Oh yeah, he looks like a piece of shit. Okay. Because he was. All right. Okay. He was part of the SS, leading member of the Nazi Party. He was one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany, and the main architect of the Holocaust. So if you really want to blame somebody for all the absolute horrible atrocities that happened to the Jewish people and many others, I don't know if people realize just how many other kinds of people were murdered and enslaved and put in work camps and whatnot. It was Jews, gypsies, anybody that was physically disabled, etc. Mentally disabled, they all got thrown in the work camps. So Heinrich Himmler is the real demon of this. The main architect of the Holocaust. Ugh. Disgusting. Okay. They were Hermann and Himmler were two of the people that were harvestable in a negative sense. Or they might have been. Ra doesn't say they actually are. They may be harvestable in a negative sense. Because that's how awful they were. Let's move on to Abraham Lincoln. Earlier we discussed Abraham Lincoln as a rather unique case. It is possible for you to tell us that orientation of the fourth density being used Abraham's body and when this took place with respect to the activities that were occurring in our society at the time. So we need to go back a little bit. So previously in a different session, in session 26, that was a while ago, Ross says that Abraham Lincoln was taken over, his body was taken over by a fourth density positive being, which I had talked about the fact that I had read a whole book called Strangers Among Us by Ruth Montgomery, and it's what's the right word? A phenomenon called the walk-in. And it's basically when a soul decides that they are done. They're done and they don't want to live anymore. Instead of killing themselves, another entity can come to them and say, hey, you want to switch? Because I got some shit I want to do and you want to leave. So you can come here and I'll go into your body and take over for the rest of your life. I know it sounds completely bizarre and crazy. There's a lot of documented cases where this seems like this might be the real deal. And I was completely shocked to hear that Abraham Lincoln might be one of these. According to Raw, Abraham Lincoln ends up being a walk-in for a fourth density entity who wanted to come in and help. And Abraham wanted to hit the road. Let's continue. Okay. So there's some things that are said here, and then Don has to kind of rephrase his question. I would like to know the motivation for the use of Abraham Lincoln's body at that time. The one known as Abraham had an extremely difficult in many ways due to physical, mental, and spiritual pain, was weary for life, but without the orientation to self-destruction. So he had a lot of stuff. He had a lot of terrible stuff happening to him, and one of the main things was that him and his wife's son died at a young age. And I don't think that either one of them ever recovered from that. I know his wife didn't, Mary Todd, and it doesn't seem like Abraham Lincoln never did either. But he didn't want to kill himself. So in 1853, this entity was contacted in sleep by a fourth density being. This being was concerned with the battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness, which had been waged in fourth density for many years. So remember, there's like a battle being fought in fourth density between what we would think of as good and evil, service to self and service to others. This entity accepted the honor duty of completing the one known as Abraham's karmic patterns. So Abraham's like, okay, let's do it. And the fourth density entity decides to come in and kind of take over, which also means having to complete the karmic patterns of Abraham previously. And the one known as Abraham discovered that this entity would attempt those things which the one known as Abraham desired to do but felt it could not. Thus the exchange was made. So the entity was willing to do what Abraham wanted to do, but didn't think he could do. Now, part of me wants to say, I think Abraham could have done it, but he was so weary. I have a feeling he could have done it, but he decided not to. So this entity takes over. The entity Abraham was taken to a plane of suspension until the cessation of the physical vehicle, much as though we of Ra would arrange with this instrument to remain in the vehicle, come out of the trance state, and function as this instrument, leaving the instrument's mind and spirit complex in a suspended state. So they're talking about Carla here. So they're saying that Abraham goes into a suspended state until the entity is done with the body, which is kind of weird. Because what year does Abraham Lincoln die? Let's look it up. It's after World War II ends. I mean, World War II. We were just talking about Hitler. The Civil War. It's after the Civil War ends. Oh, goodness. I need quick information here. He died in 1865. Okay, so in 1853, the entity takes over his body. So that is 12 years. For 12 years, the soul of Abraham Lincoln is in a suspended state where it's almost like a coma. It's like going to sleep and having no knowledge of what's happening, because that's what Carla is doing as the instrument of Ra. She's leaving her body. She has no concept of what's happening. She can't hear, she can't feel, she can't think, she can't do anything. She's just suspended, which for Carla is like, 30 minutes to an hour every time they do a channeling session. But for Abraham Lincoln's soul, it's 12 years. Is that really what happens to walk-in souls? They have to be suspended in time until the other entity's done with their body? I guess that makes sense, because if you had to watch what some entity was doing with your body, that would be really weird and probably mess you up. So I guess that makes sense. And time doesn't really exist on the other side, so it probably was like no time went by. But still, that's weird. Can we get any weirder around here? Team weird. Okay. All right, we finished that page, right? Yes. The planetary energies at this time were at what seemed to this entity to be a critical point. So the fourth density entity thought they were at a critical point. For that which we know as freedom had gained in acceptance as a possibility among your peoples. This entity saw the work done by those beginning the democratic concept of freedom, as you call it, in danger of being abridged or abrogated by the rising belief and use of the principle of the enslavement of entities. This is a negative concept of fairly serious nature in your density. This entity therefore went forward into what it saw as the battle for light, for healing of a rupture in the concept of freedom. This entity did not gain or lose karma by these activities due to its detachment from any outcome. Its attitude throughout was one of service to others, more especially to the downtrodden or enslaved. The polarity of the individual was somewhat, but not severely, lessened by the cumulative feelings and thought forms which are created due to the large number of entities leaving the physical plane due to the trauma of battle. That was a lot of words. Okay. Let's decipher these lot of words here. All right, so the entity didn't really have an attachment to the outcome. The entity just wanted to move people in the right direction to getting rid of slavery, which it succeeded. Now, it didn't succeed in the way that perhaps it thought that it might, but eventually it goes away. It takes forever. Really. We're still dealing with the effects of slavery. And that was, it's going to be almost 200 years ago. And we're still dealing with the outcome of what people thought was some good idea. Good idea, fairy. But then it says, down here in this second paragraph, that the polarity of the individual was somewhat, but not severely, lessened by the cumulative feelings and thought forms which were created due to the large number of entities leaving the physical plane due to the trauma of battle. So didn't gain or lose any karma by coming and doing all of the things because there was a detachment to the outcome, but had a lessening of polarity because they had to see and watch and think about all the people that died in the Civil War. The trauma of battle. Yeah, got it. Okay, I need to quickly finish this video because there's some people getting ready to come down into my space. So I don't think I'm going to review, but I hope that you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and there will be more videos to come, and go back and watch the old ones. Bye, see you later.